Hi everyone, I'm Dina with Mills Family Gardening. Today is May 18th. We live in North Texas, Zone 8A. And in our climate, it's time to harvest onions. And in this video, we're going to talk about when to harvest onions, what are the signs, and also how to store them properly. If you plan to use your onions for cooking right away, then you can harvest them at any stage of their growth. But for proper storage, there are a few rules that need to be followed in order to store onions well. I noticed that our onions started getting their tops flop over about a week ago, but we haven't had time to harvest them, and just today we're going to do that. And you can see that Armadillo, who likes to visit our backyard at night, he thinks that it's time to harvest onions also, because you can see all these onions lying on top of the ground, just scattered randomly. This is what Armadillo did. He digs for grub worms and he simply digs out what's in his way and just leaves it on top of the ground. But it's okay, since we're going to harvest the onions anyway. The first sign that the onions are ready to be harvested is the brownish papery skin, and that's what our onions have. The second sign is the green tops flop over. Most of our onions have their tops flop over, except for the couple of them. And we'll keep those onions in the ground and wait for the tops to fall over, or I can harvest them now and use them in cooking soon. You will also notice that the leaves start turning yellowish and brown. When it comes to harvesting itself, when you pull up the onions from the ground, make sure to pull them up gently, not to separate the tops from the onions, so the neck stays intact. That will prevent the onions from rotting during their storage. So when I pull up the onions, I gently pull them from the ground, again making sure to keep the tops connected to the onions. And that's how I'm going to harvest all the onions. After the onions are harvested, it's time to cure them. And for that, they need to be laid in a single layer in a protected area that stays shaded, dry, and the air is well ventilated. The place needs to stay warm between 75 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the onions need to stay there for about 2 to 4 weeks until the tops completely dry out and the neck of the onions also dries out. The neck of onions is what connects the tops with the bulb. When you harvest your onions and move them around, make sure not to throw them too hard, not to bruise them, because that will encourage rotting during storage. If you notice that some of the onions have not stored properly, it's better to use them in cooking soon, or you can chop them up and put them in the freezer and store them there, because they're not going to store real well. After 4 weeks, when the onions have cured and their necks completely dried out, it's time to store them. It's better to store onions in meshed bags, or you can store them in cardboard boxes where you can punch holes so there would be a little bit of air circulation. Different varieties of onions have different shelf life for storage. Here in North Texas, we grow short day onions, and those don't store that well. They can store for about 3 months, and that's what we had last year. We kept them in the back porch since we don't have a root cellar, and that worked out okay. But long day onions, which are normally grown in cooler climates, they can store up to a year. For long-term storage, onions need to be stored in a dry, cool place like a root cellar where the temperature stays between 35 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And like I said, we stored our onions in the back porch last summer, and it worked out fine because we don't have a root cellar and we don't have any cool and dry place. After the onions are cured, it's time to cut off the roots and also the top to about 1 inch from the bulb, and they're ready to be stored. But instead of storing onions in a mesh bag, you can simply braid them. That means you don't have to remove the tops, and use the tops for braiding purposes and hang them like that somewhere in the house. But wherever you store your onions, make sure the environment is not very humid, because high humidity can also encourage onion rot. When you notice that your onions start having their tops flop over, don't keep them in the ground too long, because that might encourage onion rot as well. And that's how we harvest and store our onions. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day.